Let's go to Skype right now and bring in Jeremy Stahl. He is the senior editor at Slate Magazine. He wrote an article in the last 24 hours about the Women's World Cup team, the U.S. team that just beat Australia 3-1. But the angle on the article was an unnamed official who writes on the blog for the Australian team said basically the U.S. women stink. They're just not that good. Let's bring in Jeremy Stahl right now. Jeremy, thanks for joining the show.
Thanks, Woody. Good to be here.
Jeremy, what's the big deal here? I mean, if they're not that good, they're not that good. I know it sounds funny when the Australian blogger, a guy or a gal whose team just lost 3-1, is saying that other team's not that good.
Well,
but why the firestorm?
It wasn't such a blogger. It's the Australian Soccer
an
Federation.
unnamed official from the federation.
Yeah,
yeah.
well,
I feel like you're accepting the premise that they weren't that good. And while the performance was up and down, it was a mixed first half and kind of, not a very strong performance. They were tied at halftime. It was 1-1, and they took over the game in the second half. So not only is it an inaccurate portrayal, but it kind of takes a little bit of nerve and a little bit of gall to come out and say, oh, the team that just beat us 3-1 by a 2-goal margin, pretty substantially and pretty easily, you just aren't that good. And that was his number one takeaway from the whole thing. Lessons learned was how he described it. 4 lessons learned, and number one was the USA, well, they just aren't that good. It was silly. It was silly. It might have been a troll, but it was still a ridiculous thing to do.
Jeremy, the galling part, the ridiculous part was the reasons the unnamed blogger gave for Australia losing. Oh, well, the U.S. has a star in Rapinoe, and until we ran out of gas, we were outplaying them. Well, that's part of the game, isn't it?
Yeah, that's one of the main points, I think, is the way that they go through point by point why the Australian performance was, I think they called it a better, smaller, smarter footballing side. A better, smarter footballing side is just an absurd way to characterize that game, first of all. But the way they talked about it, by criticizing the U.S. tactics, criticizing the U.S. aesthetics, basically, and saying that they were outmaneuvered, even though, the Australian team was quite clearly outperformed, is just silly. And one point that the blogger made was that the U.S. played a rudimentary bog standard 4-4-2. They were short of ideas going forward and outmaneuvered tactically. And I think it's really, for a country that's main artistic export is Iggy Azalea, it's kind of not really aesthetic arguments are not their strong suit, I would say.
Well, and maybe Team USA didn't need to do anything complex to beat them,
I like the charades. I like the people when I go down there, so they've got a few qualities about them. They got a guy playing in the NBA Finals pretty well so far. But I would ask you, I said earlier on the show that I think the main competition, and I really don't mean this as a pun, is going to come from Germany and Japan, and we have beaten them in their favorite sports in the past, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Would you see that is the main competition for the U.S.? And I would just say that they showed some bits of issues last night, first game in the World Cup, but it kind of carried over from some of the exhibitions they had going into the World Cup action.
If we're being really fair to this blogger, and we want to be fair to him, then it is fair to say that as a team that is supposed to be one of the favorites to win the World Cup, and a team whose expectation is to win the World Cup, the U.S. cannot perform at the level they did in that opening game and expect to win the World Cup, especially facing, as you mentioned, teams like Japan, but teams especially like Germany, who just were absurdly dominant in their opening round match against a clearly inferior opponent in the Ivory Coast. But it's true that if the U.S. plays that way against Germany, which I don't imagine they would if they got to that stage in the tournament, then they will not win this World Cup. But it's cheeky to do that as a defeated opponent.
You calling me cheeky? Is that what
Not you, no. The Australian blogger's cheeky.
You don't know this, Jeremy, but Woody is actually cheeky.
But you should know I'm the blood of the city here.
Yes, he's the blood of the city. Jeremy, we really appreciate your time. Love Slate Magazine, by the way, personally.
I do too.
And the magazine, the website, great stuff. What else you got right now on the website that we should be reading?
So we've got some good stuff about last night's game up, obviously this piece, and a bit of a recap of last night's match. But also kind of, fun, but also kind of serious is we have a big piece criticizing Hope Solo and looking at closely, not just at that Outside the Lines report that came out from ESPN over the weekend, looking at more closely at her domestic violence accusations, but also just her history of bad behavior and kind of putting her under the lens. And it's done, it's hard to not be serious when the issue is domestic violence, but we do kind of try to at least be as entertaining as possible in discussing Hope Solo's other kind of past misdeeds that are less ugly.
Jeremy, you're great, and we like everything about you and Slate. And the only thing we don't really care for is it looks like that room you're living in is made out of slate. If you look back behind you, boy, that is a stark room that you got there.
This is my office you're talking about,
Jeremy. Get somebody in there to paint like a palm tree behind you or something. You need a mural on the wall or something.
On the other wall, I have a Team USA scarf, actually, so I should have probably pointed it at that other wall.
Do that. We'll have you on again during the World Cup.
It's a jail cell. Jeremy, thanks for coming to us from Sing Sing.
What's your Twitter handle so that people can keep up with you on a momentarily basis?
It's just Jeremy Stahl, my first name and my last name, Stahl.
Easy enough. Jeremy, thanks for your time.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Get a
Jeremy
painting.
Stahl.
Get a painting
of Slate Magazine.
I'll point it at the scarf next time.
He's not just cheeky, he's an interior decorator. Jeremy Stahl of Slate Magazine.